Hi, my name is Ryan T. Shore, and this is my Psych 100 presentation for Dr. Peizhong Lee's Psych 100 Introduction to Psychology class. Thank you for watching this today, and I hope that you learned something just the way that I have learned something from making it. So let's start. So the experiment that I have chosen to talk about today is based in the realm of social psychology. So I think it's important for us to talk about social psychology and answer the questions, what exactly is social psychology? What does social psychology entail? And why is it an important thing for psychologists to study? Well, social psychology is the study of the way that humanity as a species interact with not only each other, but the world and environment that is around them. The goal of social psychology is to find the answer to the question, why do humans act the way they do? And why have some of the behaviors that humans have adapted in the billions of years that they've been around? And why have these behaviors become normalized and an unconscious part of the way that we act? That is what social psychology is trying to explain. And so the social psychology experiment that I've chosen to talk about today is the marshmallow experiment done by this gentleman here, Dr. Walter Mischel, who is a professor of psychology at Stanford University. The marshmallow experiment was published in 1972, but they had been working on it since 1965, and the findings were published in 1972. So the big question is, what was the marshmallow experiment? Well, the marshmallow experiment had a number of children aged between 4 and 6, and they were brought into a room where they were placed a marshmallow or similar treat on a plate in front of them. Of course, something that's going to tempt the kid's senses. The kid's going to want to eat it. But the researcher had another idea, an offer. He had an offer for the kid. And that offer was, if that marshmallow was still on the plate in 15 minutes after he leaves, the child would not only get one marshmallow that's already on the plate, but they would get a second treat as well. And so that offer would be accepted by the kid. And the researcher would leave the room and they would observe how the kids would react via closed circuit television. And they found 3 possible outcomes. The first outcome was that the child would immediately eat the marshmallow without even thinking about it. They wouldn't consider the deal that they had just struck with the researcher. They would immediately eat the marshmallow without even thinking about there being a second one. Number 2, the child would struggle with the morality of the situation, because they want to honor the agreement that they've made with the researcher, but they also are so tempted by the marshmallow. And ultimately, they would either fail or succeed at the endeavor. Or 3, the child would be able to resist the temptation and the marshmallow would still be on the plate in the 15 minutes when the researcher gets back. In the years since this experiment, nearly over almost 50 years ago, they have been making ensuing correlational research. And they found that the children who were able to resist the urge to eat that marshmallow, those children were ultimately more successful in various facets of their lives. How were they more successful, you ask? Well, they had higher test scores. They had lower BMI, body mass indexes. They were better equipped to handle stressful situations, and they even had less propensity for abusing drugs and alcohol. So there was just a lot of ways that the kids who seemed to be able to resist the urges better were able to do that. So Delayed gratification is the term that Dr. Michel coined to explain his findings. And the photo I've chosen is quite um, telling because of the famous biblical story about the snake in the Garden of Eden offering the apple, and the gratification was hard to resist, the temptation. And I found that quite fitting for this because it seems that the people who delayed their gratification and delayed the fact that they could satiate their impulses were ultimately more successful in a lot of ways. But the real question about this is, what is the psychological explanation for this? Why do some of these children have less control over their urges and impulses than the other children? What is the reasoning for that? Well, I personally believe that it's based in Sigmund Freud's theory of psychoanalysis. Of course, Sigmund Freud theorized that there were three main parts of the personality: the id, the ego, and the superego. All of these play an important role in the mindset behind this experiment, and ultimately in the way of explaining why the children reacted the way they did. So let's talk about the first one here, the id. And I believe this is where the children who just ate the marshmallow immediately, their mind was the children who ate it likely gave in to the id's animalistic nature of wanting immediate satiation. The children that were influenced by their id were craving that instant serotonin release that would come from eating the sweet treat. And that's because the unconscious mind, as the id is part of the unconscious, does not consider rationality or the situation at hand. And it just wants what it desires in the most primal sense. For instance, other unconscious primal desires are those for food and sexual intercourse. It, of course, are the part of the animal nature of our species. Next, we talk about the ego. And of course, the ego deals with the id deals with this want for satiation. The ego deals with the reality of the situation. And I believe that this is the most likely of Freud's theories to have a place in the experiment. And that's with the children that struggled with the decision and the morality. Because the children who made those decisions were likely influenced by their egos, because they were thinking about it in that they want it. And so it was like the devil and an angel on your shoulder, where the id wants you to do it and the ego doesn't want it. But even more so, the superego doesn't want you to. And that's a very apt picture there. The superego, though, is a very tough one to place, as the superego deals with rationality and decision making. And the issue here is that it's not fully equipped by the age that these children were. As I said earlier, they were ages 4 through 6. And the theory of Freud states that the children would not have a fully developed superego until about the age of 5. And so while some of the children may have been more developed in this realm, to me, that casts quite a bit of doubt on the validity of the findings. And as I said, after this experiment, correlational research has been done in a non-experimental setting where test subjects were periodically interviewed, and they found correlations between the childhood success at an experiment that just seems mundane and their ensuing success in adolescence and adulthood. So this is the question: what is more trustworthy, the marshmallow experiment, the experimental research, or the ensuing correlational research, which is done in a non-experimental setting? Well, I would say it's the correlational research. And my reasoning for that is that the young age of the subject casts doubt over the validity. 4 to 6-year-olds are not going to have the same level of self-control and rationality that an adult would have in the same situation. And so with their underdeveloped superegos, I find it hard to believe that a child would be able to make a informed decision. And so with the mind still in the age range where they're continuing to develop and they're continuing to gain knowledge and maturity, the experiment shouldn't be considered a fair one. And it's also, I think, extremely likely that other correlations would be found that would explain the subject's successes other than the results of the experiment that occurred when they were 4 to 6. One notable one being social situation, whether you're raised in money or you're raised in poverty. That would change the way that you do this experiment, because one that's rich might get all the marshmallows they want. They don't want it in that particular moment. Well, one that's poor might want one because they never get it. So that's my opinion. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for watching. The slideshow is by myself. The narration is by me, and the research was done by me as well. I'd like to thank Dr. Peizhong Li for his help with this video. And that is all. Thank you. See ya.